Welcome, everyone. My name is Becca Clark, and I'm the student recruiter for the online Master of Applied Leadership and Management degree at Thunderbird School of Global Management at Arizona State University. Thank you for joining our MALM webinar series. If you have any questions about Thunderbird's degree programs, please see my contact information in the chat box. A couple of housekeeping items. Dr. Tracy will have time for Q&A at the end of her presentation. Please enter your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please use the chat box for technical issues or other comments. I will send a recording of this and a handout in about a week. Takes some time for processing. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Sarah J. Tracy, Professor, Honors Faculty, and Director of the Transformation Project at the Hugh School of Human Communication at Arizona State University. Thank you, Dr. Tracy.
You're welcome. Can you hear me all right? All right, fantastic. Okay, so it's so great to be with you today. As I was telling Becca, this is the first time I've ever done a webinar like this, and I'm actually coming to you from my home. Many of us are at home today, and so we've crafted up a studio here, and I'm happy to be with you for the day. My research and background is in the area of organizational communication, and specifically I have been focused on emotion issues in organizations and how we can create organizations so they are places where people can flourish. So they're not only surviving, but they're also thriving. And now more than ever, many of us are dealing with stress and burnout. And so I'm glad you're here today with me, and hopefully you'll get something out of it. So to begin, we're actually going to start with a bit of a activity, and it is going to ask you to draw. And so look around. If you're in a place, I know some of you might be tuning in from a place where you might not have pen and paper, and so if that's the case, you'll just have to use your imagination. But if you have a piece of paper and a pen, go ahead and grab that. And I'd like you to imagine this prompt, this question. Whoops. What does your workplace feel like? And you can choose to focus in on what your workplace feels like right now, if you are coming from home. Or you can think about your traditional workplace and just sort of close your eyes, imagine, what does it feel like? And then just draw whatever comes to be, whatever comes into your mind. All right, I'll give you a couple minutes to work on that, and I'll be right back with you. All right, so hopefully you have been able to draw something for yourself there. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen again. And Becca, can you confirm that you are seeing the PowerPoint again?
Yes, we see it.
Great, thank you. So now that you have drawn that, I want to show you a couple examples of what I have seen in the past. And so here is one example. For instance, this person is viewing their workplace as a mountain where they're having to climb, right? She starts over here as a very small person and as this sort of journey metaphor and as these clouds and lightning and so on. And finally, you know, if she works hard enough, getting to the other side of some sort of success. Here's an example next of someone who views their workplace as a roller coaster. Whee, oh my gosh, stop, right? But you must be this tall to ride. So also this feeling of like, am I good enough? Here, the person is seeing another journey, and you can see how big the waves are compared to the person, right? This suggests a little something about control or maybe feeling a lack of control. And this poor person is not feeling too good in terms of what their workplace feels like, that it is really a space of pressure and the walls closing in. And so what can we take from this? One of the things that I study as a communication professor are metaphors. And each of these drawings comes with embedded metaphors, words that compare one thing, such as the workplace in this case, to something else. And so it's helpful to take a look at your own drawing and ask yourself, what are the lenses that you are seeing the world through right now? You know, certainly the world, there's something happening in the world, but metaphorically, how are you seeing it? So what are the metaphorical lenses inherent in your drawing? They serve as embedded framing devices that enable and constrain our behaviors and beliefs. And your frames are going to suggest something about your feelings of power and control in your workplace right now. And they also likely will suggest something about the level of stress that you're having. If you have a drawing that is like some of those that I just showed, that you will probably are feeling or experiencing some level of stress and lack of control. And some drawings and metaphors suggest a healthier or more sustainable workplace, right? The sunshine, the opportunities for growth and so on. If you have those in your drawing, that might suggest some opportunities for flourishing. So what is our takeaway from this? Well, each of you have your own drawing. You're not going to be required to share it with me or with anyone else. You can put it on your refrigerator, add to your art projects if you're working at home with small children right now. But one of the things to take away is that a lot of us are feeling stress and burnout in our workplace, and maybe even more stress and burnout now that many of us are not in our workplaces and might be working from home in the case of coronavirus. So when I say stress and burnout, just a couple definitions for you, and you'll get a handout later that has this information on it as well. So stress is when expectations are higher than what you feel capable of. That's the definition of stress. Stress then can result in burnout. And burnout is considered to be a three-pronged concept that is connected to emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and cynicism can show up as depersonalization or a negative shift in responses to others. And this is particularly true for those of us who work with lots of people, right? That have lots of clients who are relying on us. Burnout can show up as those people showing up as nameless, faceless others that we just have to deal with. And then a third part of burnout is a feeling of inefficacy, or a feeling that we don't have power, we don't have control over our situation. And also this feeling of a decreased sense of personal accomplishment, right? So inefficacy, we don't have control, power, we can't do what we think that we're supposed to do. So those are some definitions for stress and burnout. How do you know if you are burned out? Here are a few signs. All right. So one is being quick to feel irritation. A second one is chronic fatigue. A third is frequent procrastination. Perhaps there's little jobs that usually you'd be able to just get right to, but for some reason you just keep putting them off. Another is impaired concentration. Another is feeling emotional for no good reason. All of a sudden you break down in tears or get angry, that quick to being irritated. And another is a sense of detachment or alienation, that like we just don't care, like we just don't want to see it. And all of us might be feeling this to one degree or the other, but if we're feeling this over time, and especially a number of those characteristics, those are signs that we're burned out and are warning signs that it's time to do something. Or if we see our employees, for those of you who are managers on this call, if we see those signs in our employees. So what triggers stress and burnout? A few things. First of all, you might remember that definition of stress is having higher expectations than we can achieve. And so if there are very high expectations, that's going to oftentimes result in stress. And sometimes those expectations are given to us by our employers, but also many of us just carry them on our own back. Right? And so a place to look if you're feeling stressed out is, you know, do you need to lower expectations for yourself right now, to be compassionate with yourself? I know one of the things that I did personally to prepare for this webinar is that because it's the first time I've ever done a webinar like this, and especially from home, I told myself a couple times beforehand, Sarah, now it's okay if you don't do this perfectly. And I'm trying to be compassionate with myself about that. That little moment when I went off camera just a few minutes ago, it was because my dog was jumping at the door. So I figured that out, and I'm just trying to be like, okay, whoosh, right? We're going to be okay with it. Anyway, maybe I'll bring her in later and you can meet her. We'll see. Another aspect to burnout that triggers it is social comparison. Right? I wished I looked like a starved baked potato like that girl. I bet she feels perfect. Now, you may not have any desire to look like a starved baked potato, but there may be other people in your workplace where there's social comparison going on. And one of the things we know about toxic workplaces is ones that set up social comparison. So if you are in a place where all of your employees are consistently comparing themselves to one another, if you have systems that set that sort of thing up, if you're trying to reduce burnout, that's a place to look. Like, in what ways can we reduce the social comparison? Another thing is in terms of social comparison, I would say it's connected with social media. And so when we are on our screens excessively, and especially social media, we have a tendency to compare our reality of our lives with what I call a curated life that's on Facebook or on Twitter or on LinkedIn. And when I say curated, I'm using it in the ways that museums use it, like that you curate, people create these sort of photoshopped lives and these perfect lives. And oftentimes people feel worse about themselves. In general, people feel worse about themselves after being on social media than before. And that's something to pay attention to, especially right now, for those of us who are excessively on our screens. Another trigger of stress and burnout is being underpaid and in debt. And that is something that when you are underpaid and in debt, it's not just the lack of pay, but that oftentimes that comes with a whole host of different hassles. And research shows that our moods go up and down much more with the many little hassles in the world than they do with really big things or really small things, or I'm sorry, really big positives or really big negatives. So if you can reduce even those little hassles in life, you know, the part of the carpet that you trip over, or a computer issue that just always is getting to you, those are going to make a big difference. But the thing is that people who are underpaid and in debt oftentimes have more of those little hassles, things that are always going wrong, and that builds up over time. Another trigger of stress and burnout is constant evaluation and fear of rejection. This is one of the main reasons I work a lot with the doctoral students in my teaching work. And this is one of the reasons that being a doctoral student, for instance, is so stressful, is because there's always this constant evaluation and this fear of rejection when we turn in papers or create projects and so on, that we're not sure if it's going to be accepted in the way that we presented it. We do our best work and then maybe we get told it's not enough. This is a big one. A huge part of stress and burnout is this uncertainty, lack of control, and sense of overwhelm. And many people are feeling this lack of control, overwhelm, and uncertainty. And so it's normal to be feeling stressed and burnout in the face of that. And we'll soon be getting to some amelioratives to all of these, by the way. These are just the triggers. So what do we do now? We have all of these triggers for stress and burnout. We might be feeling overwhelmed, dazed, alienated, not wanting to get out of bed, or just procrastinating on simple things and feeling like we don't have a lot of control. So what are some amelioratives? Well, one of the things we know is that we can't just go after those problems, right? You certainly can, the problems that I just went over, but what if we try to get to extremely positive work as well? And so more and more research has been looking at not only what causes stress and burnout, but what creates meaningful work. And so the researchers pretty much agree that there's several different characteristics of meaningful work. One of them is a sense of purpose and contribution to the greater good. Another is a sense of agency or control. A third are opportunities for influence in the workplace. I think I have just clicked on something. No. Excuse me, a little technical. There we go. A sense of belonging and relationship building. So do we have a sense of belonging and relationship in our workplace? And can we use our talents? And can we develop our talents, move them from good to great? And then finally, a decent income. And in the United States, the research shows that at about $75,000, $80,000, our happiness drops off, right? That we don't get happier with a higher income from that. And so the people making $50,000 are not all that much happier than people making $200,000, because the thing is that with more money also comes more stress. That's just an interesting fact in terms of how much our income actually affects our happiness. Now, if we make money and we give it away, that does help us feel happy. So going to these different parts of the meaningful work, one of the things is having a purpose and creating a life purpose statement and vision. And so we're going to do another little activity here. You're going to have a takeaway where we spend some time with you coming up with your purpose. And so this is a very popular way of doing this. A number of executive coaches and therapists and professors and so on use this technique. And so grab your paper and pen again. And you're going to start with listing 2 of your unique personal qualities. And they could be whatever are unique to you. Those are just examples: enthusiasm and creativity. Right? Maybe it's discipline. Maybe it's organization. Maybe it's being humorous. So 2 of your unique qualities. And then next up, list 1 or 2 ways that you enjoy expressing those qualities when interacting with others. And so take the actual one. So the example here, enthusiasm and creativity. I use my enthusiasm to support. I use my creativity to inspire, right? I use my discipline to do what? I use my innovation to do what, right? So whatever your 2 personal qualities are, listing 1 or 2 ways that you express those qualities when interacting with other people. And for the purposes here today, hopefully you're focusing on the workplace, but it could be other places if that's what you so desire. All right, third. Now you get to have a magic wand in your hand and say, what does the perfect world look like? And the perfect world to you is going to look very different than the perfect world to everyone else, right? As my example here, I have everyone is freely expressing their own unique talents, working in harmony and expressing love. Perhaps a perfect world to you looks like a very organized spice cabinet and desk area. Right, so what does the perfect world look like? And feel free to go big here. You don't need to be reasonable. That perfect world. Ah, if we could just all take ourselves to it right now, huh? Okay. And then finally, putting them all together is you start with this sentence. My purpose is to use my, and go back to this first part up here, your enthusiasm and creativity or whatever you wrote. And then to support and to inspire others. And then this last part here is the perfect world, to freely express their talents in a harmonious and loving way. And so you're just taking all these 3 and putting them together into your purpose. So if nothing else, you're leaving this webinar today with a drawing of what you think your workplace feels like and with a clearer idea of what your purpose is. And the research would say that if you can then look at this purpose and revisit it, maybe something else comes to you later in the day or tonight or when you're sleeping or in the shower, and see about how you can start implementing that in your activities in your workplace. Are there ways that you can express that purpose that you haven't before? Are there ways that you might talk to a manager to see how you could align your work activities with that? If you are a leader in an organization and you have the opportunity, you might do this exercise with your employees and start seeing, okay, how can we do some purposeful design of people's activities in the workplace so it aligns with what their core genius is, right? Moving people from good, their core genius, to great, rather than focusing on things that they're not centrally up to. All right. Another thing that we talked about is that having a sense of control in the workplace is going to be helpful. And one of the things that it can seem kind of fun to have a ton of free time. However, it's also nice to have some structured activities and making your priorities visible in time and space. And I personally use Google Calendar, and here's an example of a Google Calendar. And so I put my priorities in my calendar in terms of my work priorities. And my philosophy is 1 calendar and 1 life. one life, one calendar. So I also put my other priorities in my calendar, things like exercise, meditation, walking my dog. So it's clear, like, okay, this is what I'm doing and when. And especially when I'm feeling frazzled or, oh gosh, what should I be doing right now? It's a space to be able to go to and say, oh gosh, what time is it right now? Yep, that's what I'm supposed to be doing right now. And it also, doing this sort of making our priorities visible in time and space, it helps us to be present in whatever we're doing. That we know, excuse me, that we know that what we're doing at that time is exactly what we're supposed to be doing and not something else. Also, you'll see here on Google Calendar that you can color code different things for different activities. And that's something that I recommend so that it clearly you can see, okay, gosh, this is my free time, or this is my lunch time, or this is my core genius time. I put my research and teaching, for instance, in green, and my key consulting in green. Those are my core things. And then I do other activities like checking my email in different colors. All right. In terms of a sense of agency and control, another thing to think about is managing your inbox. And managing your email inbox, or all the different boxes that you have coming into you. Many of us have not only our email, but also Messenger and Twitter and LinkedIn and so on, and having one central space where you funnel them into eventually, so that you have a place where everything is. And there's a technique that I use. It's called Mission Control. You can look it up online. There's programs on it. And it helps me to figure out what I'm doing now. And for me, a now means going back and actually being able to put it in my calendar. That means I'm doing it in a now, even if it's not right now. I have an actual present time to do it. We also have opportunities to put things in. I'm not doing this now, right? I have a folder in my email that says not doing now. And so it's a priority, but I don't have it in my calendar yet. And I'm not even kidding myself that it's in my calendar yet. And then I have another box that is never doing now. And it's things that I can't yet throw away, but I can't imagine doing them anytime soon. And so one of the things that we know, recipe for suffering, is thinking we're going to get it all done. We are never going to get it all done. And so when you create a management system for yourself, you get rid of some of that suffering and can actually be clear, like, okay, these are my priorities. This is what I actually have in my calendar. And here are things that I'm not going to be doing for a long time. And we can have more integrity in the way that we speak with people and what we commit to when we do it that way. Another way to have control in our life, and also moving into focusing on our core talents, is saying no to good so you can say yes to great. This idea that we can't do everything, and that part of being able to do what our purpose is in the world is to say no to those things that are sort of peripheral to it, and really focus in on what is my core genius, what are my core talents. As you might remember from that first PowerPoint slide in terms of what does meaningful work mean, one of the things is opportunities for influence. And to have influence, one of the tactics in order to have influence is to learn to make powerful requests. And many people go throughout life never making clear requests. Instead, they might make assessments where they say something like, boy, I sure do wish that the meetings were shorter in this organization, right? Which we're hoping maybe other people might hear as a request, but maybe they might not, you know, rather than making a request like, can we make tomorrow's meeting 30 minutes? I have another priority after that, right? And people can say yes, no, counter offer. Part of making a clear request that works too is really thinking carefully about the other people's priorities and concerns and their interests, and making a request where it really connects up with their own core genius and their interests. Requests many times land for other people as opportunities, not as an imposition. For instance, you might have someone in your family that loves to make pies at Thanksgiving. And if you made a request to them, oh, could you please make a pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving? They would say, yes, yes, I would love to do that. There's nothing more than I would love to do than make a pumpkin pie, right? And so as good leaders, one of the things that we should be thinking about is, what are the requests that I can make that will land as opportunities for other people? It also allows us to have influence and be able to shape our workplaces. Another key part of meaningful work is this social belonging. And now more than ever, I think it's really important that we're thinking about how do we get these feelings of social belonging, even in a space of social distancing. And so creating those healthy social connections, want to hang out, maybe you're not going to handcuff yourself to somebody else right now, but really connecting and doing less to try to impress other people into hanging out with us. I'm super cool and awesome, so you should be friends with me. Not effective. And unfortunately, social media oftentimes results in this less effective way of making those social connections, that we can come off as bragging rather than actually making that connect. And so you might think about, even now that we're using a lot more online and social connections and so on, how is it then I can make friends and connections even through that way? It might be doing more of commenting on other people's posts, interacting with them, getting on the phone and speaking with them, doing those video interactions, etc. Cultivating kindness and gratitude. This is going to create a space of belonging and social connection in the workplace. Finding, some workplaces have gratitude boards where they can publicly pronounce things that they're grateful for, or it might be just sending some thank you notes, or, you know, posting on social media how happy and grateful you are about a certain person or a certain something. And looking for those key places of being of kindness. Kindness not only creates this more social environment and loving environment, but it also gives us a sense of agency and control. When we can do something kind, we can say, oh gosh, I actually have control over something in my life or in my workplace, and this is one of them, and it's showing kindness to other people. Avoiding social comparisons and celebrating other people's successes, right? So we can be awesome, and other people can also be awesome, and we can celebrate other successes. And so, you know, trumpeting those out, perhaps having a time in meetings where we spend time celebrating one another, right? That might be more effective than celebrating ourselves. And also, again, looking at those situations and workplaces that cultivate social comparison and thinking about how we can mitigate those. Also, creating and visiting dialogic spaces. This right now, given our current situation, is more difficult than typical, but more and more workplaces are realizing that these spaces where people just bump into one another and have embodied conversations and have sort of chit chat about whatever are very important. Not only do they grow the social connections, but they also motivate creativity and innovation. And so just as an example, yesterday I was doing an online course for my doctoral students, and the typical way that these sort of online webinars unfold, right, is that everybody is on mute, there's one person speaking and so on. Well, how can we create dialogic spaces either virtually or at our workplace? So for instance, I had an extra long break on class last night, and we just left everybody's microphones on who wanted to be on. And oh my gosh, all of a sudden what broke out is someone broke out their guitar, someone started singing, and there was this connection that happened that wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have just had that free-flowing space where people could dialogue and be improvisational with one another. And so that's, you know, the water cooler spaces, huddle desks create dialogic spaces. So that's something for you to think about. And if you cannot talk to your coworkers, think about talking to strangers. Research shows that even very quick interactions with strangers gives us a happiness boost. And so the next time that you are standing somewhere waiting for public transportation, or if you are standing in line with people, interacting with them even about small things like the weather or what's in their shopping cart, those interactions create a happiness boost. Finally, engaging in self-care. All of us take care of ourselves in different ways. For some of us, it's spending time alone. If you're one of those people, great. This is a great time to be alive. But it might also be asking for help, putting ourselves first, setting boundaries with those toxic people around us, right? Not allowing that in our lives. Saying no, forgiving ourselves, being compassionate with ourselves. Okay, so I've just talked with you about a lot of information, thrown a lot of information your way. So let's pause and come with some questions and contributions. Any comments, questions about anything that we have covered so far?
Thank you, Dr. Tracy. Also, as a reminder, please post your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We got a comment from Maria. Thank you. Great timing for this information.
You're welcome. Yeah, you know, the kind of stress and uncertainty we all are feeling right now is beyond the norm. It's a new context, but with any new context, there's also some opportunity that comes with it.
Our first question, as a team leader, how do we counter individual employees' tendencies towards social comparison and insecurity, along with the presumption of judgment and dire consequences that seem disproportionate to the perceptions of the rest of the team?
Great question. And I'm so glad I get to read it as well and see it, because it's a long question and I'm going to take it in chunks here. So how do we counter individual employees' tendencies towards social comparison and insecurity? One of the things is to look at structures we have in the workplace that might cultivate that. And we have employees here from a great range of organizations. And so the example that I have might not be your example. But for instance, if you are working with a sales team and you are always putting everybody's sales numbers publicly up, that is going to foster social comparison. And so you've got to make a call on whether you actually think the result of that for any productivity bonus or something, if that's why you're doing it, is actually overwhelming the negative part of it, which is going to be social comparison, which can lead to burnout and stress. And when people are burned out and stressed, they're not going to be good salespeople. So one of the things is just look at those structures, and also to create opportunities to praise and suggest that there's not a fixed pie. And I'm looking at the second part of this question, along with the presumption of judgment and dire consequences that seem disproportionate to the perceptions of the rest of the team. Yeah, you know, we can only do so much in order to frame those presumptions, but it's really about telling stories and also reframing the situation so that those perceptions might be changed. And so it might be creating space for vulnerability, where people can share, because a lot of the social comparison comes from imposter complex or imposter syndrome, where people feel like everybody else has got it together. And when we find out that, gosh, no, other people don't have it together, we're all doing the best that we can, but we also have these huge insecurities and so on, that oftentimes is a release valve.
We have a comment from Alem. Great presentation. Thank you for the enlightenment.
You're welcome.
Another question. Can you talk a bit more about the no to good and say yes to great?
Yes. Okay. So I love this idea of saying no to good so we can say yes to great. So dovetails with this idea that we can never say yes to everything. There's only so many things that we can do in our calendars, and that we have to say no oftentimes to the good things, like the good requests that we have come in our life, or the good possibilities, so we actually have time for great, for the things that are our core genius and are our core talents. And if we say yes to everything, like, oh, well, that's a good thing, that's a good thing, it may be that we never have enough time or space to get to that great. And I know from my own profession that the great, the stuff that is really up my alley, those are the things that I oftentimes do not get asked to do, but it's the things that I pursue personally. And so it's like, okay, I have to say that, yeah, I could write that book chapter, or yes, I could do that workshop, but that, you know, what I'm up to in the world instead, my purpose is here. And so I need to say no to those good things so I have time for these great things.
A question from Mary. What is your advice for managing up when the boss or supervisor expresses no interest in helping the team or individuals reduce stress or burnout? Some managers are completely clueless and pressure for ridiculous and unreasonable levels of expectation.
Yeah, yep. So one of my areas of research, in addition to stress and burnout, has been workplace bullying. And for better or for worse, there are managers in the world who not only are clueless, but some that are downright abusive, and that they are not going to be in a space to even see the stress or burnout. And so a couple things that employees can do. First of all, there are things in this list of things that you don't need any supervisor to give permission to. So you can cultivate gratitude in your workplace by saying thank you or praising others and so on without a leader's permission. And so look at the things that are within your control to do. That said, it can still be difficult with a boss or supervisor that does not get it. Sometimes people bring in materials on this topic and say, oh gosh, you know, I found this article, even sending an article around about stress or burnout. There is an organization called The Greater Good. You can Google them. They are through Berkeley, and they have a number of resources on creating flourishing in the workplace. And so if you have control over bringing materials, sharing materials on an email listserv, that's another idea. Also, a lot of workplaces have opportunities to do lunch and learns or programming that comes in. I've gone into a number of organizations and done programs on, you know, even just specific parts of what we covered today, like how to manage email inboxes, how to deal with an abusive or abusive workplace or a not civil workplace. And so bringing in those quote unquote experts to come in and talk about, because many of these things bosses do because they think they are productive, that they think it's helping the bottom line. And the research shows that when people are stressed, burned out, or being abused or not treated well by a bully in the workplace, productivity goes down the tubes. And so when bosses learn this, sometimes they're like, oh gosh, I thought I was doing this in order to create better sales or more productivity. And then they find out, nope. And so they might change their tune a little bit.
A question from Jacqueline. What books would you recommend about these topics then that can be a support for us and to share with our colleagues?
Let's see, different books. I'm not at school right now, so typically I would look at my bookshelf where most of my books are. I have some of them here. I do like, there's this one here by Vince Waldron is good, Communicating Emotion at Work. But this is more of an academic book. I would actually recommend some by Goleman on social intelligence. That might be helpful to you. And I will do a little bit more thinking on that as well. And I will provide Becca with a few more recommendations when I can have some time to just think through it. So great question.
That's great. I'll send that out with the recording.
Great.
Question from Stacy. This was great. How can we manage imposter syndrome in ourselves and our employees and or students?
Yeah. So one of those things that I recommend is, can you limit the messages coming into you that are causing the imposter syndrome, right? So sometimes that comes in the form of social media, how much time that you're looking at other people's curated lives and their sort of perfection. So if you can limit some of that, for instance, one of the things that we as academics get every week, unless we opt out, which I have recently done, is statistics on how well our research is being cited compared to our colleagues. Now, what we know about social comparison and imposter syndrome is, even when we are on the top end of that, when we are socially comparing well, it still triggers some anxiety because we think, oh, we're doing well. Oh gosh, what if next week my rating goes down? So think about whether those sort of constant messages about how you're doing compared to others around you are really motivating you. For me, I know that they are not motivating me. And if I really want to go see that, I can go seek it out rather than it just being automatically delivered to me. And then as much as possible, I recommend sharing your own vulnerability. As an instructor, I try to share with my students. Yesterday, when we did our first online course, I said, this is the first time I've done an online course. I'm uncertain, I'm stressed. It's amazing how much when we share our own vulnerability, other people feel more comfortable to do so. And then we can show up to each other more as human beings and not as those perfectly curated selves.
Next question. I'm happy to say that our department is setting up a voluntary 30-minute Dialogic space online today for us to ask questions or just talk about things, to get to know each other better, to invoke a little fun and break up the day in these times.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. I've heard of people doing virtual happy hours, doing, just sort of coffees. And, yesterday I didn't even plan it, and it just happened. And so there's something that happens when we have people together in a space that is not run by an agenda, where community, senses of belonging, and creativity can happen.
A question from Kameta. Hello, Dr. Tracy. My question goes to your suggestions on creating management systems for ourselves. When I saw the image of the overloaded inbox, I immediately felt sick to my stomach.
Yeah.
I feel I have more control over myself when I have less than 20 emails in my inbox. Now I'm at 600 plus. Help!
Yes.
Because now I've shut down. I can't stand to look at it. Paralyzed.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And I suspect, Kameta, that other people are very much in your situation. There are a couple sort of quick things that I would suggest for you in this situation. You could arbitrarily tell yourself, I'm not looking at all of those emails. I cannot, because to do so, it just keeps paralyzing me. And so tell yourself, I'm going to start managing email from today forward. You could send an email to all your contacts and say, if you have emailed me in the last 2 weeks, unfortunately, because of the situation going on in the world and work right now, I was not able to take a look at that. Please be back in touch with me. Right now, you could at some point choose to go back to those 600, but it might give you a fresh start. So right now, what we need you to get to is just to a place where you're not feeling overwhelmed. Because when we feel overwhelmed, we do even more of just not even looking, because it's just too much. We can't take it all right now. And for many of us, we are at reduced capacity right now. And so be forgiving with yourself. I have found that most people are being pretty compassionate and forgiving with one another right now. And so give yourself that break. That said, what I would start doing is triaging those emails if you have the spirit and willingness to go through them. So maybe go through them and have a folder that says slightly important, and start dropping the ones that you think are anything that you need to do with, and try to get through a bunch of them really fast where you don't have to respond yet, but just so you get them sorted. Right? Once you get them sorted into slightly important, then you can maybe break that down into, and when I say slightly important to you, not to somebody else, but up to your purpose, your core genius, what your job requires and that you have said that you will do, right? Other people's purpose is not yours, right? And so thinking about whatever your purpose is, and maybe you need to have a conversation with your supervisor about this, just so you have some clarity on that, depending on where you are in the organization. And then putting them into those folders might be useful to you. Something like, I'm doing this now, and meaning I'm doing it now, meaning that you've actually put it in time and space on your calendar, that you're not actually going to do it now, but you've put in your calendar, respond to Jane in terms of her question and given yourself a half an hour tomorrow. Respond to Tony regarding email on this and put it in for next week at 10 a.m. Right? And then you can look at your calendar and go back into that doing now folder and say, okay, I'm going to deal with this. And then other things that are priority, not doing now. You don't have them in your calendar yet. You're going to have to go back to them and decide if you're ever going to do them or not. And then that never doing now, things that you think you should do, but you can't imagine getting them actually in your calendar and accomplishing them in the next few weeks. And then you're not kidding yourself. You're not pretending. You're like, oh, I've told myself. And then if you have questions from a supervisor, you can say, listen, my calendar is full with these other things that are my priority. And yes, I did get that. And it's just not something that has risen to the priority yet. I hope that helps. And I'm happy to do another workshop or webinar, or, come into your organization at some point and do more on time management, because when we don't feel like we're in control, it's really overwhelming.
A question from Gabriel. Great presentation. How would you alter or highlight your suggestions for virtual teams?
Well, I have been thinking about virtual teams in creating this webinar. But one of the things that I think that is especially important in terms of virtual work is this. We get so much sense of community. We as human beings are social beings. And we know from the happiness research that the most social people in the world are the happiest people in the world. And so when people are working virtually, there is necessarily a decrease in that social time. And even with those of us right now that are on synchronously and that, you're seeing my face, you are not necessarily seeing my breathing or being able to coordinate your breathing with me. And for anybody who's ever been to a yoga class, you know that there's a sense of community and calm when you can coordinate breathing. You also, it's probably quite difficult to see the dilation of my eyes, right? Whether, there's shock or whether there's belief or understanding. And I certainly have no access to your nonverbal cues right now. All of you right now are words on a page in front of me. I don't know what the facial expressions are. I feel like I've tried to make a couple jokes. I don't know whether there is laughter or not. And so when you're working virtually, it's really important to try to figure out ways and times that you can do communication and interaction that has more of that embodiment to it. And that's especially difficult in a time of social distancing or of a geographical, if people are in different places, but doing telephone calls and maybe one-on-one telephone calls where you can at least hear the tone of voice, or doing something where you actually have the screens on and smaller groups so you can see people. Or even, I know many of us in our virtual teams, we have this rule like, gosh, everybody needs to put it on mute. And that helps with some things, right? We don't hear, the papers rustling and that sort of thing. But we can't hear the laughter or the burps or the giggles or, you know, that, you know, you heard my phone going off, the stupid phone, but like that also creates a humanness with people. And so trying to figure out ways to create that humanity is really important for the social connection and belonging that can stave off some of those triggers of stress and burnout.
A comment, thank you so much for this. It is so helpful and so timely.
You're welcome.
And our final question today from Trevor. So you've said the dialogic spaces can be positive and helpful, but I can imagine these spaces could be places for social comparisons as well. How can we ensure that dialogic spaces stay positive?
Trevor, that's a really good point, right? We do not have control over what gets brought up in certain dialogic spaces. And so, you know, I don't know if we can control improvisational conversations between our employees, but I would share with you that the research shows that dialogic spaces, when we create them, whether they are stand-up meeting, huddle desks, or spaces where people just end up bumping into each other in the hallway and so on, that organizations that have those spaces have more creativity and innovation because people who wouldn't have a set-up meeting with one another have reason to bump into one another, and also those spaces for belonging. And, you know, also don't underestimate the power of what you yourself can bring to the space. There's this concept called conversational pivoting, and that's where if we hear something negative, we might take, you know, the positive part of the comment as well and pivot and move to a more positive space of communication. All right. Well, thank you very much for your questions and concerns. I have a couple more slides here just to finish up. I learned a lot from your questions, and also I'll get back to you on those books. So, where have we been today together? First, we started with this drawing exercise where you got to take a look at the way that you're envisioning your workplace right now and how it might be engendering stress and burnout. And keeping in mind that metaphors and how metaphorically we are viewing our world might really construct what we are able to see as possible. And so you might ask yourself, how is your metaphorical lens serving you? What is it allowing you to see as possible? What is it kind of keeping shaded? And certainly there is a reality out there, but also the way we're seeing this reality really affects what we see as being possible right now. We also spoke about how it's important to battle burnout and stress, and I focused on a few of the triggers of burnout and stress. Things like isolation, things like social comparison, imposter syndrome, etc. But I encourage you to spend as much or more of your energy not just battling those things, but instead focusing on how you can create vibrancy, engagement, courage, and human flourishing in your organization. In summary, what makes for meaningful work? First is a sense of purpose and contribution to the greater good, and you now all have in your hands an idea, maybe a clarity of what your purpose is. A sense of agency and control, right? If you don't have any control right now, think about the things that you do have control over, right? Maybe you have total agency and control over playing with your dog, so relish in that. Opportunities for influence, a sense of belonging and relationship building, use and development of your talents and your core genius, and a decent income. So for those of you who have control over that for your employees, take a look there. So thank you very much for your time today. It was a pleasure to spend this hour. I appreciate your attention and your compassion, as also I've been figuring out all the logistics of doing this myself.
Thank you, Dr. Tracy. And thank you everyone for joining Thunderbird's Master of Applied Leadership and Management webinar series. We hope to see you next month.